So let us see here. Let's give people a couple of minutes to join in. I hope you can all hear me well. I see we have a couple of people coming now. Perfect. I'll jump the gun a little bit with the start here. So I'm hoping that we can all be patient for just a minute or two to get people in the door, the virtual door that is, before we get started. But I'm going to just tell you a couple of things until we do wait for everybody to join. I see some more joining in now. Perfect. So this is going to be a webinar about a surrogacy journey, a step-by-step process. So it's going to be during the presentation, if you have any questions or if you want to leave any comments, you can do that on your phone or iPad or whatever you're on by pressing the Q&A button, basically. So there's a Q&A button. You can always leave questions there. I might not address them immediately, but I will get to them at the end. So feel free to do that. It should be anonymous, so the questions can only be viewed by me. So feel free to really get creative, I was going to say, with the questions. Don't hold back. This is an opportunity to learn more about this field and ask those important questions. And as a father to surrogacy myself, I would love to answer any questions that might bring clarity to you in this very special journey. So we're just going to give it another minute just to see if people can figure out their Zooms and all of that. And then we'll get started on this presentation. I will also mention that obviously for anybody looking into this journey, surrogacy is a huge undertaking, right? So in any way of expecting us to cram everything in within 30 to 45 minutes and do that very detailed, that's not going to happen today. There's so many details to the journey and complexities. But we'll do a great overview, hopefully. You might be in different stages of your research, which of course gives you different approach today and different kind of expectations on what this is going to be about. But hopefully it gives you something. So everybody has something out of this when we say goodbye at the end. But let's go into the presentation a bit. And if we have anybody else joining in, they can do so while we are talking about this. And once again, if you just joined, you can do the Q&A. You can ask questions during the presentation. I might not answer them directly, but I'll see them in the end. And I'll make sure to answer any questions you might have then, of course, as well. All right, let's jump into this. So I always say this, if you cannot see this, please jump in on the Q&A and kind of wave the red flag that you can't see the presentation, or if you can't hear me anymore, that would be immensely helpful. Just starting off this slide with some of our lovely intended parents and surrogates, of course, that have been through this journey with us. So this is kind of the core, right, of the surrogacy journey. If egg donation is involved as well, of course, but in the surrogacy journey, that's really the core of the journey, the lovely intended parent or parents with their surrogate. This is where kind of dreams are built and started to be built. So we just think that this is such an amazing representation of, you know, our clients, the lovely journey and the relationship between our intended parents and surrogates, which is something we really, really value here. So we always want to start off with this nice image there of these lovely, lovely people working together to make dreams come true, which is just amazing. All right, let's talk about today's schedule. We're going to do a short introduction, talk shortly about Hatch and Pacific Fertility Center, very, very briefly, because we will spend the vast majority of time speaking about the timeline to parenthood. I'll show you a little timeline and schedule. It's really useful, in my opinion, into understanding this journey and how it all works step by step. Then we'll go into more of the details of that step-by-step process. How do you choose a clinic and agency? What do you think about? Finding your donor, what considerations does that entail? Creating your embryos and then having your surrogate be screened and matched with her is super exciting and important step. And then, of course, the embryo transfer leading hopefully to a birth and then a process that happens after that. So we will go through those steps in a general overview. We won't be able to be very detailed today because we have limited time. But of course, you're always welcome to meet with us, have a consultation with us, and we'll go in the depths of that and talk about the details if necessary. And then we'll leave some time for that Q&A at the bottom there, just so you can get your questions answered, if there are any. I'm today's host, so I'm Edwin Fogelmark. I'm the international manager here at Hatch and Pacific Fertility Center, and I'm also a two-time dad through surrogacy and egg donation. That's almost sounded like a two-time Olympic medalist, but just a two-time dad through surrogacy and egg donation. I'm actually an international intended parent. Our team consists of international intended parents, domestic intended parents. All of our staff are previous intended parents or previous surrogates, which is kind of amazing. Just to kind of draw from that experience in our own journeys and when we guide others through that, which we think makes quite a lot of sense. All right, so let's talk briefly about Hatch and PFCLA. Hatch is an agency of 35 years of experience, starting off with egg donation, then going into surrogacy, and today is probably the longest family planning agency that exists in the United States. Everything that's non-medical is taken care of there. We have our own egg donation agency. We have actually the largest fresh egg donor database in the United States. We were the first egg donor agency, which is kind of cool. We have a great hand-curated database for anybody who's looking into egg donation. I know this is more about the surrogacy side, but obviously if you do look into that, feel free to go to the hatch.us website. You can register for the database and get full access. No strings attached. We take care of the surrogacy part, of course. We'll talk about this a little bit later, screenings, etc. But that's obviously a very important part to match our lovely intended parents with amazing surrogates and create those families and dreams. That's really what we're all about. Legal, we work with third-party attorneys. We work with insurance companies, of course, and take care of that part for the surrogate and donor. And then we just coordinate between the agency and all these parties, including the clinic. But one thing that's really amazing here at Hatch is that we have our own in-house IVF clinic. So Pacific Fertility Center has been a standalone clinic for decades and then merged together with Hatch to create a one-stop shop for IVF, egg donation, and surrogacy. This can really elevate how we can do things in terms of coordination and communication, how we can prepare for success via earlier medical records review and pre-approvals, doing uterus lining checks, and sometimes even mock cycles because our surrogate applicants are actually patients of our PFCLA clinic. So just some really amazing things we can do there. And also on the financial side, we can do quite beneficial plans because we control that chain and we stay accountable from A to Z, if you will. So that's an amazing combination we call the Peace of Mind program, where we just build in all of that with the securities we think are necessary to not be repeating steps, or at least not be losing out of funds when you do repeat any steps, and just try to mitigate any risks we can with that one team experience. That's what that program is all about. But happy to have a consultation to learn more about that. So we're not focusing too much on this today. Hatch's experience, the number of countries we've served so far is quite vast in terms of years and in terms of countries served. The 3,300 happy, healthy births, and we have a high success rate in terms of pregnancies and births. So today we have a 99.5% success rate of having a child through this program at the end. As I mentioned, all of the staff are experienced surrogates and IPs, which really brings out that experience in us. And when we screen surrogates, what do we think about as previous surrogates? When we talk to intended parents, what was important for us back then? Like, all these experiences are really worth cherishing, but also sharing with intended parents. And then, of course, we have our in-house physicians, which is amazing to have that medical guidance, not from surrogate match and onward, but from the start to the finish. And that's really amazing, given medical disqualification rates, etc., to just try to mitigate all of those risks once again. And I'll share a little bit about the clinical side as well here, so you can have a look at that. I see that somebody has a question. I promise to get that in the end. So just a little bit of background on the clinic here, which we can share with you here. We'll also be recording this, of course, and sending out. So you can see a little bit about numbers of births and first transfer pregnancy rate and how many years of experience we have, etc. in this. All right. Please let me know if you can't hear me anymore. I just had one of my my earbuds here do a very funny sound. So please do let me know if you cannot hear me. That would be helpful. All right, let's look into the timeline to parenthood now that you know a little bit about Hatch and PFCLA, and see how that looks. So this is a schedule, I would say, or a timeline to parenthood. So what this means is that this journey could consist of 2 or 3 different things. Either it consists of your own embryo creation using your own eggs, or it also includes a donor. But it does definitely include the surrogacy side and the clinical side of things. So a lot of the times we get questions on how does this journey start, basically. So there are a couple of different models for that, depending on what you're doing and how your situation looks. One can be that you create your embryos first. So that could be with your own eggs or with an egg donor. With your own eggs, that might be more common in terms of if you're expected to maybe have to go through a couple of cycles to create embryos. In terms of egg donation, a lot of intended parents would do that simultaneously as they are on a surrogacy match list. But finances and or timelines, that can also depend on those two things. So either you do that simultaneously, meaning that you just start off your donor search, for example, if you're doing egg donation, and at the same time you're on a match list with an agency, or you just do that green bar embryo creation first. So those are kind of the two ways to go. The clinic is obviously always important. And I think that you would want to select your clinic quite soon for advice on testing, on donor selection, etc. So this journey in the simultaneous kind of aspect of doing this all at the same time starts off with getting on a surrogacy match list, which usually includes a deposit for a match list, at least with the big, larger established agencies with long experience. There might be other models for this. Usually for agencies also trying to kind of get off the ground a little bit, they might offer something else. But with the most experienced, larger agencies, that's always the case. At the same time as you're on this match list and moving forward, you would start your donor search. But even before the donor search, you would probably want to sign up with the clinic, and also you would want to do your testing and screening. And for male intended parents, that also includes semen deposit. So that's something that's important to do quite soon. Our intended parents, usually within the first month from signing up, if they haven't done it before, they would actually go to our clinic, to LA in this case, and they would do that. But whatever your clinic would be, you could go to that clinic and finish that work. You would look for a donor until you find a donor, and what's the right donor, etc. It has a lot to do with your own preferences. There's obviously medical aspects to who's a suitable donor on that side, and there's other agency-related aspects of who is a great donor. But in terms of the donor match and your selection, it's a lot about your own preferences. So while agencies usually love to help to, coordinate that and all that, it's usually a self-selection in many ways, because only you know what you really want in donor, and that can look very different for different people. Education, for example, might be super important for somebody, while others might focus more on the medical side of things, or achievements in other ways than academical, etc. So there's many, many different factors to that. When you have a donor, you would usually have your donor travel, first be pre-approved by your doctor, and then go and travel to the clinic to do an in-clinic screening if she's medically pre-approved. At this clinical screening, she would also do a genetic carrier screening if she hasn't done that before. If she's a previous donor, that usually has happened, and sometimes the agency does or does not know what the results of that was. But also the panels can differ. So sometimes even if somebody has done a genetic carrier screening, it can still be worth doing that again for the donor to match the intended parent's genetic panel that they're going to do. If everything looks good, you're moving forward. Basically, you're doing legal work and medications for that donor. So legal means basically having a legal agreement in between you and that being cleared. So it's called legal clearance, basically. And then you would go on to medications and then retrieve the eggs, do embryo creation, basically. If you're using your own eggs, this looks slightly different, but many of the steps are equal. You're not going to go through legal for using your own eggs, etc. But still, there's a screening, there's pre-cycle testing, etc. To be done. But that can also be discussed during a call. So when we create embryos, some agencies require genetically tested embryos, some do not. So Hatch, for example, requires at least 2 PGTA-tested normal embryos before the surrogate match. So in our scenario here, when somebody reaches this step or this stage, they already worked through the match list. They're prepared with our team at their surrogate letter. They've worked on a work preference sheet on what they want in terms of a surrogate match. They've reviewed a profile, and then they've also met their surrogate, and they would have a match sheet and requirement call about 8 to 9 months in, and then have their final match about 10 months into the journey. Depending a little bit on, what are the exact specifications, right? We are all different. We come with different backgrounds and then different experiences, and we might think that different things are important for the surrogate as well. So this might impact the matching time. So let's say somebody is really diminishing or making the pool of available surrogates that we can match with really, really small, then of course it's going to take longer. While if we have more general specifications or requirements, then it might be a bit quicker. So when the surrogate match occurs, we'll do surrogate screening. So once again, pre-approval and then in-clinic screening. Actually, with Hatch at PFCLA, our chief medical officer of 30 years of experience has done a pre-approval medical records review and also uterus lining assessment on that candidate. So we're going into the surrogate screening with high confidence in our supplying program. But if you're working with another clinic, then that clinic will do a pre-approval, hopefully quick. Sometimes it works quicker, sometimes it's really slow. and then an in-clinic screening as well, of course. If everything looks good there, there's legal contract once again, and then medications for the surrogate, and then the embryo transfer, and fingers crossed that that's successful. So then there's a live birth, hopefully 9 months roughly after that. So that's a little bit of a schedule. I know that was quick and a lot to process, and obviously this is just an overview of how that looks, but I do think this gives kind of a nice insight into, if I just generally try to map out this journey without going into all of the details, what does that entail in terms of steps and in terms of the timeline itself. So this is how that would look within our program, basically. So it's built on that example, but obviously it can look different agencies, different clinics, etc. Some of these steps are natural. They're not going to change because you change a provider, an agency, or a clinic, but some of these steps can look a bit different on how matching is done, or, you know, all of those aspects of that. All right, I hope that was useful. So let's look more deeper inside of this then, step by step. So the first step, obviously, is choosing the agency and the clinic. So let's talk about choosing the agency first. So what should one keep in mind? This might seem very obvious that you would want your agency to be reputable and ethical and experienced. But why we also do mention this, because this is not guaranteed, right? It doesn't just come with saying that because you're working with an agency, they are reputable, ethical, and experienced. It's really important to dig deeper inside of that experience, inside of those years of experience of what kind of background does the staff have, you know, what's their experience, and are you part of organizations like, you know, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, the Society of Ethics of Egg Donation and Surrogacy, because this journey is about people, and when you involve people, you stay very ethical and respectful of that fact. So it's really, really important to find an agency that not only you can trust to take care of your journey, but to take care of your surrogate, to respect the donor, like to really look at the humans involved in that journey. That is really important as well. And obviously experience matters, because during the journey, there might be issues arising, hurdles. They're not unheard of in surrogacy, egg donation, nor IVF. And it's important to be able to handle them with great capacity. And obviously experience does bring that when you've seen those scenarios play out and you know how to handle them. So I think this is not like, it's not a guideline that you're going to go out there and you're going to do an online research and be like, you know, this is what I'm looking for on their website, right? You might look at different things and other things, but keeping this in the back of your mind is really important, because this is going to set the tone of your journey and also how your surrogate or donor are treated. So that's really important. Choosing a clinic, it becomes a little bit more technical in terms of, you know, experience, a number of cycles, for example, how many physicians are there, who are the physicians, do you have direct access to your doctor, for example? Do you also have a dedicated doctor that's going to actually do all of the steps for you, including screening your surrogate, for example? The lab is really important. The lab is unfortunately sometimes forgotten with us intended parents and patients even. The doctor is only one part of that big kind of effort to have a baby. The lab is really important. Fertilization and all of that done in the lab is a super important step. So what is their capability? What is their equipment? What kind of embryologists work there? What's their background? That also becomes really important. Some of these questions are very technical and you wouldn't really ask them unless you're really interested, but it's important to just not forget about the lab, because they do also matter a lot for the success of the journey. Success rates, I think nobody's surprised about that. Success rates are great as a piece of the puzzle, but are not always representative of the actual truth, I would say. If you look at success rates, when the success rates are reported, they could be from cycles way in the back, for example. It can also depend a little bit on the patient that the doctors are working with, what kind of cases or what kind of complex fertility backgrounds or medical history that do the doctors really approach and accept as patients. And that can also impact that success rate. So I think speaking to doctors about success rates and kind of for your specific situation is really important to really understand what can they do for you specifically, rather than just being like, I'm a 35-year-old woman and what does that mean for me? It's really good to go into the details of what is your specific situation, what's your medical history, what has your fertility journey been looking like so far, just to get that additional data and be able to tell you more about that success. So that's a little bit about choosing the clinic. So looking at the agency and looking at the clinic, that's some kind of just basic things to bring with you. There's so much more to talk about when looking at a clinic and agency. So in a consultation, we can go through that as well. But these are just kind of like the overall key points. If you are using an egg donor, I think it's important to look at, where should you find donor and what should you think about when doing that? So one thing that's really important is to not compromise on your donor. There are plenty of agencies or clinics that will lock you in within their donors because of X and Y reason. It's really important to not start to compromise on that. So for example, in the HAT program, if you work with even our Peace of Mind all-inclusive program, we can still have a donor from another agency be your donor, and we can take care of the surrogacy and the IVF part of things, because this is really 50% of your child's genetics, right? That should be based on your decision making and your preferences, and not just because Hatch happened to have recruited that donor and you have to now work with them to work with our program. So explore many databases. Doesn't need to be a Hatch donor in our programs. We do have the largest fresh egg donor database, like I mentioned, though. But when you do look at donors, it's important to not just stick with one donor. That usually does actually happen. Like people really focus on one donor, really get a good feeling about her. She might not work out in the end. There might be many reasons for that. So it's usually great to identify at least one or two backup donors, just because of having that ready, but also because most agencies do not refund the full program fees after matching. So that's also important to have like a backup there, if you can find, at least two or three that kind of speak to you in that sense. And what should you look for then in a donor? I mean, the first things first, seek advice from your fertility physician. Like this is a highly medical journey that we're undertaking, right? So there should really be medical guidance every step of the way. So do not forget about the advice from the fertility physician. Your agency can be super kind-hearted and that have a big, huge intention to help you out. They're not medical doctors. So you should get advice from a fertility physician. Age-wise, younger is typically better, which seems kind of a crass way to put it, but typically between 19 to 29 years of age is a good range. Unless it's a proven donor, then you can kind of bump it up a little bit maybe. But once again, have your doctor give you that advice. The database, for example, Hatch's database consists of over 300 donors, last time I checked. So the options can be overwhelming, and going into this process of just entering a database and then just scrolling can be really, really time consuming and also emotionally draining. So really important, if you're a single intended parent, congratulations, you can just make a decision by yourself, but list down what you think is important for you before going in. And if you are in a couple, speak to each other, have a chat about what do we think would be an ideal donor based on X and Y. And you can filter through that in a database and you can get a better selection instead of just going through this exhaustive scrolling method where you're just getting overwhelmed with the process. Hatch does not offer frozen eggs. We do get that question sometimes. Frozen egg banks can be a cost-saving option, but usually you have to buy the eggs in batches of 6 to 8 versus, for example, doing an egg retrieval. On average, you'll get about 20 eggs. So there might be of that more purchasing. And if you do not have any eggs left from that donor, you're not guaranteed that those eggs are going to be there left to buy more if you need them. So we usually stick with fresh eggs or fresh egg retrievals in our program. So for example, our Peace of Mind program, that is with fresh egg donors, because we also do include unlimited egg retrievals in some programs. We include unlimited embryo transfers in all of the programs. So that also is based on the success of using a fresh egg retrieval cycle and the number of embryos you get out of that. When we look at choosing a donor, we also have to think about the donor screening process. So donors would obviously complete an application, but also ideally go through an interview process. So this is a little bit of what Hatch does in this way. The interview process is important to get to know the donors more, to see how they, think about things, move, talk, and just generally get a sense of who they are as a person. We want to be able to describe them in a great way, and that does not only work through medical records reviews or seeing an online application. We really want to speak and interview with our donors. So we do end up with a highly curated matching with a curated database that consists of about 5% of the top candidates that apply to become a Hatch donor. That includes screenings for also intelligence, accomplishments, attractiveness, but also medical testing. For example, AMH testing is done for most of our donors to be able to share with your doctor and get that great data points so you can understand if, what is the suitability of that donor based on her age, AMH, and other factors as well. Usually helps your doctor quite a lot. Compensation guidance from the agency is the most normal, but donors can set their own compensation as well, even though they do tend to kind of listen to the agency's advice. Most of our first-time donors earn $10,000 as their compensation. And if they're an experienced donor, that can go upwards. Could also be other reasons for that being higher, like education or other accomplishments, etc. But usually it's $10,000 for a first-time donor, and then it goes upwards with previous donations. So just to give you a little understanding of what do we do in terms of screening before the match occurs? Because there should be much screening before a match occurs, both for the donor and surrogate. It's not about matching, then finding out all of the details. It's about doing as much as we can before so that we're going more confident into the next steps. And like I said at the bottom there, you can actually register for the Hatch Egg Donor Database, and you can have a look there on all of our donors. Okay, so you have your agency, you have your clinic, so you've created you have your donor, so it's time to create your embryo. So this just generally an overview describes the process of going through that, from actually testing the sperm and eggs. If you're using your own eggs, for example, or you're using your own sperm, that's one of the first steps. And ideally, we say to people, especially international intended parents, like do your sperm testing in advance, so you know that looks good before going into the process. But obviously, the same goes if you're using your own oocytes, that you want to make sure that the doctor thinks that that's a good process for you to undertake. So that starts with some ovarian stimulation if you're using your own eggs or for the donor. Obviously, some monitoring throughout that ovarian stimulation before the egg retrieval is done, and moving on to fertilization. So if you are two male IPs, it's possible to use two sperm sources for that. We cannot swirl together and create an embryo connected to each person. That does not work only in TV shows. There's no additional cost though for having two male IPs do a sperm freeze, and we use the eggs 50% each, and we fertilize that way. There's no additional cost either associated with that at PFCLA. And if we do have a HIV positive partner, then there is an additional step you need to undertake with a specific program to make sure there's no virus there, and then you can create embryos from that semen to move forward. Then there's some culture of embryos after that for a couple of days, and then there's the genetic testing. So pre-implantation genetic testing. This is a biopsy of the embryo, after which the embryos are frozen, and after about 3 to 4 weeks, the PGT-A test results come back and tell us which embryos were tested normal and which ones were tested abnormal. In Hatch's case, we move forward with the normal embryos, and those are the ones who would consider to transfer to a surrogate. And then, the freezing is done after that PGT-A testing. And then we're waiting for the surrogate match and the next steps. But that's how it goes to create some embryos. Before we leave the embryo creation stage, just talking about like what does an egg retrieval give on average when using a donor. So if you look at that process with us, you usually get about 20 eggs, depending on the donor and all of that. From those eggs, we would create somewhere between 4 to 6 normal embryos. So there might be more embryos created, which were tested abnormal, which we do not move forward with. So somewhere about there with the normal embryos, good quality embryos moving forward. And what does that then translate into in terms of pregnancy rates, etc.? So one excellent quality embryo transfer translates into about an 82% first pregnancy transfer rate. And if that's 93% rate. We do not do twins at PFCLA and Hatch, so that's something that's important. We do get that question. That comes with increased risks and costs, and it's not recommended to do that. But we're just going to give that example still of how that looks. So just to give you a couple of rough numbers, if you are a numbers geek, like some of our agency staff, they love these things. So just give you some numbers for satisfying those intended parents. All right, so we have the embryos now, and now we're ready for a surrogate match. And just as we discussed with the donor, screening before matching is really important. So like this varies from agency to agency. This takes time and effort. It takes staff to go through that screening process, and it takes a certain focus to do that. So nobody should lead you into this misconception of that. If screenings are done the same everywhere. There might be common ground with the larger, more established agencies that have really figured out a great way to do this, but there might still be variations, and could be big variations as well. So how do agencies even find surrogates? So for example, for Hatch, they're found through referrals for previous Hatch surrogates. Other methods can be online events, advertising, but also online events or in-person events. So sometimes we have our previous Hatch surrogates go to in-person events, and they speak about their experience of being a surrogate and how that all worked out to kind of educate those that might be interested in becoming a surrogate themselves. From that screening process overall, not only these steps, but in the full screening process, we get about 2 to 5% of surrogate applicants accepted into the program to become a Hatch surrogate and ready to match with some great intended parents. We also do screening on intended parents, something that usually is forgotten a little bit. Hatch will absolutely be doing criminal background checks and a therapy session with the intended parents as well. So the pre-screening is not only on the surrogates end, it should also be done on the intended parents. to protect surrogates as well. So what does that look like? So the review usually begins with an extensive application for the surrogate applicants. So if there's any disqualification at that stage, that's the end of the journey. We thank them so much for going through that process with us at this stage, but there we cannot move forward. If we can move forward, we move into a very excessive interview process. So this is an interview process with the surrogate. It's an interview process with her partner. There's a lot of calls to make sure that not only do we understand the full picture, but also we want to educate the surrogate applicant. We want to make sure that she understands that what kind of undertaking is this? What are you expected to be doing? What's the pressure points, right, of this journey? So we want to make sure that everybody going into this journey, both intended parents and surrogates, are well prepared, knowledgeable. They know how this journey is going to play out more or less. And that's really important to avoid those surprises along the way. We also do a virtual home tour, still a part of our screening process, even though most agencies do not do that anymore. We do still want to do that. It gives us an additional sense of who that person is and what their environment looks like from day to day. And like I said, education is key for all parties here. Something that's really interesting is that when we look at a surrogate applicant, this person actually becomes a patient of our clinic. So this is really interesting because when we request medical records or journals, we can get that directly from medical providers. So we can get a very, very full medical records collection from that because we're actually requiring that as a medical provider from Pacific Fertility Center. And instead of having an agency staff now step in and do that review, and nothing against agency staff, we're all very passionate and hardworking, but we're not medical professionals. So we would rather have our chief medical officer with 30 years of experience come in, do that medical assessment based on those medical records, and give us pre-approval. So when you have a surrogate go for in-clinic medical screening, that usually takes 3 to 5 days with the clinic. We see some clinics taking weeks to complete that. So we really want to do this beforehand. So we go once again with higher confidence into the next steps of the journey. And you should really let your doctor and your clinic make the medical decisions or together with you guide you through the medical decisions. Not that the agency control that, because once again, we're not medical professionals in that sense. We're not medically trained for that either. Background checks on everybody. We do criminal background checks, independently criminal background checks, and we also do civil and BMV. For intended parents, we also want to make sure we do criminal background check, which is done by a third-party provider, so we get that independence in that assessment. We also do a psychological evaluation with the third-party mental health professional, also independent, on all parties involved in the surrogacy arrangements. So this gives you a quick I say, and I talk a lot, kind of quick overview on how this screening process looks before the match. So expect something like this from your agency. Do not let anything be decided or be done later. You should really have this done so you know that you're matching with somebody who's really qualified, who's safe, not only for you, but for herself. That's really important. And this is just a little bit of a step-by-step description of how we go through those interview processes, etc., that I just explained. Okay, so let's talk about surrogate matching now that we talked about screening. So surrogate matching consists of either having a list approach. So you get on the match list and you're going to be matched when you hit the front queue, basically, the front of the queue. The other approach is what Pat would do, is a more of a hand-curated approach. So there's still a match list in that sense, but it's more loosely used in that way that intended parents that are at the top of that match list, we're looking for the most suitable intended parent and most suitable surrogate to match together. And suitability might be based on a lot of different things. It might be legal considerations, medical considerations from your doctor, your own specifications, and just generally who intended parents are and what they expect in terms of communication or other expectations, values, etc. So we really want to make sure we're curating that matching process because that's going to make the match hold long term and not break off and we need to restart that process. So this whole first come, first serve is not really the best available method. We think it's better to do a curated approach. And with that approach, over 90% of our intended parents, they actually match with the first profile we send them, even though they're always skeptical in the beginning. How can you make sure that you're going to hit all of those notes? Because we're not guessing. It's not a guessing game. We're doing a match preference sheet. We're doing a match requirements call. We're educating both parties on what they want and understand what they want. And then we match together that way. So we do have a good track record with that. And how that works is when it's time to match, of course, and this is all done by our previous surrogates, of course, as well. So they're doing the matching process for you and with you. Review a profile in detail before the match. And this is something you should absolutely expect from your agency. You need to see a detailed profile of this candidate for sure. So we're talking about, not only personality and who she is as a person and her family, but also everything from lost wages to insurance considerations, state regulations in the state where she lives, other logistical factors in terms of travel, etc., is really important. And especially if you're in a program that does not cover things unlimited, you really need to understand the details of how much will I pay for insurance, how much will she travel, how far will she travel, how much will that cost me. In the Peace of Mind program, it's a bit different because we cover all of that and we just take on all of the costs for it. So there's very few considerations you have to make based on like logistical factors in terms of a match, but it's not the same everywhere. When you do look at this profile, if you're not happy with that, that's totally okay, of course. If you do like what you're seeing, then we move on to that Dear Surrogate letter, basically. So we're writing a letter from the surrogate, from you to the surrogate, describing who are you as intended parents, who are you as people, your background that brought you to surrogacy, etc., etc. And then she reads this, the surrogate would have a peek at this. And if she feels comfortable, you would have a video meeting, which is, I usually describe it as a weird first date. Some people are great at this, but obviously there's some kind of underlying pressure and nervousness in this. This is the first time you're meeting. Somebody might carry your child and, you're obviously somewhere else. There's a lot of kind of anxiety in that a bit, but HAT will be there to facilitate that meeting, break the ice, focus on the right things, and move people along. Usually it's a really nice call that people remember for a long, long time. And if everybody feels comfortable after that, and this includes the surrogate, of course, I get questions about, that she also approved or say yes, absolutely. Like that's a mutual decision. Everybody needs to respect or protect their own integrity and their own journey. So anybody can say no, anybody could say yes. If it is a yes on both ends, we move forward. And what's really nice, especially with my own experience of having surrogates be disqualified in the surrogacy journey, it's really nice to know that if you're using the clinic, PFCLA as your clinic, you know that a medical doctor of the caliber as our chief medical officer has actually already been through the medical records and got a full medical records of you, and she meets the medical criteria so far. It just gives you less of that worry about, okay, she seems great, this looks great, but what would a doctor say? Will she be pre-approved? Will this screening be successful? We go into higher confidence with that because we have that done with our doctor. So that's the match. Now you're matched and you have a surrogate. It's time for the embryo transfer. Somebody travels to the clinic of your choice and does the embryo transfer, which is a technical process done by your IVF physician of taking the embryo and inserting that into the uterus of the surrogate. And there's where uterus lining thickness is really important and generally very important in this journey. And this is why it's so nice to be able to do a uterus lining assessment early as well. So that's something we always do on our surrogate applicants. Sometimes even a mock cycle to see how does she react to medications if we think that uterus lining isn't really what we're wanting to see right now. So this once again gives us really high confidence going into the next steps. And then you had an embryo transfer. Of course, you had that period of pregnancy, and now after the birth, not that we want to skip the birth part because that's an amazing time that you never forget, of course. But after that happens, there is a preparation of legal documents and establishment of parentage. That can look a little bit different depending on if you're domestic or if you're international, etc. But what we want to do either way, either if you're domestic or international, is guarantee a safe return with your baby back home, wherever that might be. And in some cases, that also requires the preparation of a passport for the child. For the international intended parents, it's really important to understand that countries differ a lot in terms of this. So you do not only need great US legal counsel, which we can provide with our amazing third-party attorneys, but you also need great local counsel, local attorneys to guide you. With HAT's long history, we do have a great network of local attorneys in different countries. So we're always happy to give you that contact and connect you with them so they can really give you good guidance from the start, which is really important. All right, one last thing, because now we kind of reached the end of that, right? So one last thing I want to talk about is communication and keeping in touch with your surrogate, because this is something that there's a lot of misconceptions about this and also a lot of strong opinions, which might not always play out the way you might think. So communication is really important. And for example, with HAT, we require our intended parents to communicate at least weekly throughout the pregnancy, required. Transactional arrangements is not a thing that HAT really condones. We really want the surrogate and you to have a positive experience. And that experience is only enhanced by good communication and continuous communication. Before the pregnancy, once a week at least is great. I mean, if you can do more, that's amazing. During the pregnancy, we usually want to see that step up a little bit, let's say at least twice a week. A lot of the times that's texting. I usually joke about, sending a picture of my lunch to my surrogate and being like, hey, I'm having tacos today. And she replied back, I'm having a soup today. And I mean, that was more or less it for the day. We didn't really have anything else to discuss at that time. But still, it's about this sharing, about not only about the pregnancy, it's about sharing your lives with each other a little bit, about kind of building that connection. Because in reality, you might be in the delivery room together one day, and it might have been nice to have had a chat or two before that happens. So like I said, not only about the pregnancy, also social conversations. And surrogates really do love to hear about excitement of intended parents. You have to think about she's all the way over there in the US, if or in her state, and she's pregnant with your child. Like, she really does appreciate getting questions of how she's doing, that you're excited, that that you're nervous. They understand all of that, and having successful pregnancies themselves and births in the past, they can relate to that. So build that ground for you both to stand on, so you can have a great experience together. And just support her. That means supporting your child. So that's always something I think we should all do all the time. And then after the delivery, that could look different. Some people stay in touch lifelong. We are still in touch with both of our surrogates. One of them is actually there on that picture with our daughter as well. So that's really important for us to make sure that we have that positivity around the journey. And I've never incurred any situation where that was negative in terms of meeting each other again and keeping in touch. The other way around, super positive. And in some cases, it just kind of becomes more about milestones, right? Birthdays, Christmas cards, and that's also okay. We're all very busy, right? There's no requirements on a relationship after the birth, but this is usually organic, and it does either lead to a very close friendship or it leads to those milestones. Sometimes people do lose touch after some time because everybody is very busy, but it is important to kind of try to stick with it. But the key to really positive communication is equal expectations and equal will in communicating. And that's something that we map out during our matching process. All right. I had to take a huge breath there. I hope I haven't been speaking too quick. These webinars are always very exciting, but also kind of limited in time. And we do have a couple of minutes left. Do feel free to book a call with us if you feel inclined to discuss any of these things more in detail. That's a dedicated time just for you and your situation and what do you need to know. You can do that by going to the website, filling out a short form, depending on if you need egg donation only or surrogacy and egg donation. Or you can send the email to me, of course, or you can scan the QR codes here below if you're that technically advanced. But that's what I had for today. So let's see if we had any questions here among the people that are here. Okay, so let me come in with one question here. How is the timeline different if embryos are already available? So the timeline actually in terms of the match is not different if you do have embryos or not. What helps if you don't have embryos is obviously to get on the match list, because you're going to work off quite a few months on that matching time until you start working on that preference sheet and that your surrogate letter and having those interviews with the matching team. That might help. But let's say you already have embryos and you come to us and say, hey, we'd love to work with Hatch, and how does that work? The matching time remains the same. It doesn't matter if you have embryos or not, if that makes sense. We have somebody asking in terms of cost, minimum and maximum cost for the UK. So I'm assuming you mean the United Kingdom. In terms of the United Kingdom, we do surrogacy in the United States. So agency, Hatch, and clinic PFC lead, we operate in the United States, not in the UK. So in terms of cost for the UK process, the UK surrogacy process, you would have to connect with somebody local, a local agency or a local expert in that field. So I can tell you about US costs, but I have a hard time telling you about the UK side of things because I don't know that process well enough, basically. So I apologize about that, but feel free to shoot me an email if you need to, and I'll do my best to try to make that make sense for you. Now I think I've lost my earbuds. Okay, so let me do that. Okay. So please shoot in with another question if you have that, if it's not about the UK, but I can't answer the UK side of things. But I'm sure we can find somebody who knows all about it if you're looking into a local process. All right, so let's see if there's any other questions you want to take the opportunity to throw in there before we say goodbye. If you do need to leave, thank you so much for joining. If you do want to stick around and ask another question or two, I'm going to stay here for at least a couple of minutes more just to make sure that everybody is happy and do not have any more questions on this. I see a couple of more people in here, but I don't see any more questions. So I'm going to thank you all for the time. I hope you learned something nice from this, wherever you are in your journey. Wishing you really the best of luck, wherever you end up, wherever you do. And hopefully that brings you that dream family of yours. I know it's a long journey. I know it can feel impossible. Trust me, I started and I stopped and I restarted and I stopped again. And I had hurdles left and right my first journey. And the second journey, very smooth. So don't give up. Like the journey is there. This is a path to parenthood. Learn if it's a good fit for you or not by talking, questioning, being detailed, and hopefully that brings you to your dream family. But I'm going to thank you all. There's no more questions, so enjoy your day or evening, and it was really nice to have you all here. Take care.